51 ships turned around, with not a single diplomat involved. For weeks, Washington watched and waited. Then, within the last 24 hours, Iran's own military broke ranks with its own government and acknowledged something no one was supposed to say publicly. What happens next in the Strait of Hormuz could change everything. Stay with us. Before we go any further, welcome to the Siege Report, the channel serious minds turn to when the world gets dangerous and the headlines don't reveal the full story. If you've been with us before, you already know how this works. If this is your first time here, do yourself a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Not for us, for you. So you don't miss what's coming next in this story or the one after it. And before we dive in, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. Drop your city, your country down in the comments. It's always remarkable to see just how far and wide this community reaches. Now, let's get into it. For weeks, one narrow stretch of water has captured the world's attention. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but through this tiny passage flows nearly a fifth of the world's oil. When something happens here, the entire world feels it. Since the 14th of July, the blockade in the strait has gone back and forth, and the numbers tell a clear story. 51 commercial ships have been turned around. 2 more were disabled. 2 others were boarded. Not a single vessel has made it through without facing the same outcome. 0 ships have passed through the blockade since it began. This is not the work of diplomats sitting at a table. It is the work of Iran's Revolutionary Guard operating in waters they claim as their own. And they have made their intentions clear through actions, not simply words. Just this morning, a missile struck an Emirati tanker in that very same waterway. It is not the first attack of its kind. Since February, 15 Emirati tankers have come under fire in these waters. Each one adds to a growing pattern that the world can no longer overlook. While Iran's ships are being pushed back, so is patience. The United Arab Emirates has started calling the situation exactly what it appears to be: piracy, not a diplomatic disagreement, not a misunderstanding. Piracy carried out on open water against ships that have every right to pass through. And yet, even as ships are stopped and tankers are hit, oil prices have remained relatively steady. This tells its own story. Markets are not panicking, but they are also not expecting this to end soon. Traders are watching, and what they see is a slow, grinding standoff, not an immediate resolution. Behind the scenes, a very different picture is developing. For the past week, Iran's diplomats have been working closely with Oman. They have described the discussions in confident terms. A joint statement is reportedly in its final draft. A framework of understanding is described as nearly finished, waiting only for approval from the highest levels of Iran's leadership. On paper, it sounds like progress. It sounds like the kind of breakthrough the world has been waiting for. But there is a problem, and it did not come from outside Iran. It came from within. While Iran's diplomats were making the case for peace, another voice inside the same government was making a very different case. A voice that speaks not for negotiation tables, but for the men who control the strait itself. That voice belongs to the Revolutionary Guard. And in the last 24 hours, it said something that brought analysts to a halt. Something that suggests the diplomats in Oman may be negotiating a deal that the people actually holding the strait have no intention of respecting. For months, the world has hoped that a diplomatic solution could bring this crisis to an end. 51 ships and 2 direct attacks later, that hope is now facing its biggest test yet. What the Revolutionary Guard said next did not simply complicate the negotiations. It revealed a deep divide at the heart of Iran's government, one that could determine the fate of one of the most important waterways on Earth. For 7 straight days, Iran's foreign ministry told the world a very specific story. A deal was near. Coordinates had been agreed upon with Oman. A joint statement was being finalized. All that remained was approval from the top levels of Iran's leadership, including the supreme leader himself. Every statement came from the same government building. Every one of them pointed in the same direction. A route through the Strait of Hormuz that international shipping could actually depend on again. It looked for a moment like real progress. Then, in the last 24 hours, another voice from within Iran's own system spoke up, and what it said changed the entire picture. A spokesman for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps made a public statement through Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. He said the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz depends only on the specific mechanisms and conditions established by the Islamic Republic itself. He said this process has nothing to do with the talks taking place between Iran and Oman. Read that again. The very organization that controls the strait just said publicly that the deal being negotiated by its own government's diplomats does not apply to them. This was not simply a tough negotiating position. It was something far more serious. It was a direct signal that the agreement so many people have been waiting for may not actually govern the situation on the water at all. Iran's diplomats can sign whatever paper Oman puts in front of them. But the Revolutionary Guard has now made it clear in plain language that it is not bound by that paper. And this is not the first time something like this has happened. A previous ceasefire was signed in Tran only for the Revolutionary Guard to bypass it and launch drone attacks on ships. Anyway, the pattern is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Diplomats talk of peace. The military acts on its own terms. And each time the same question returns. Who is actually in control of Iran's decisions regarding the Strait? In the span of one day, two very different messages emerged from Iran. The diplomats said peace was near. The military said the diplomats do not speak for the Strait of Hormuz. These are not two sides of the same coin. They are two separate stories, and only one of them controls the ships on the water. This contradiction turns the strait into something more than a shipping route under dispute. It begins to look like a stronghold controlled directly by the Revolutionary Guard, separate from the rest of the Iranian government. And there is more. Even as the statement was delivered, a missile struck a tanker belonging to the United Arab Emirates in the same waterway. Iran describes the strait as a matter of national sovereignty. But for the ships caught in the middle, sovereignty is now looking like something else entirely, a justification for treating international waters as their own personal checkpoint. The Foreign Ministry built a week's worth of diplomatic goodwill. The Revolutionary Guard erased it with a single public statement. And now the world is left trying to determine which version of Iran it is actually negotiating with, the one that sends diplomats to Oman or the one that sends missiles into tankers. This is the divide now sitting at the center of the crisis. Not a disagreement between two countries, a disagreement inside one. And until that divide is resolved, no agreement signed in Oman is likely to mean very much where it actually matters most, on the water inside the Strait of Hormuz itself. While Iran's government argues with itself over who controls the Strait of Hormuz, a different kind of operation has been quietly running above the water. It does not hold press conferences. It does not issue conflicting statements. It simply stays in the air day and night without stopping. At the center of this operation sits an aircraft most people have never heard of, the KC-135 Strat tanker. It first took flight in 1956, decades before most of today's fighter pilots were even born. It was built during the Cold War for a mission that thankfully never happened, keeping nuclear bombers fueled long enough to reach the Soviet Union and return home safely. That war never came. But 70 years later, this same aircraft has found a new purpose. It has become the backbone of the naval blockade now unfolding in the Persian Gulf. Without it, American fighter jets could only remain over the strait for about 90 minutes at a time before needing to return to base. With it, those same jets can remain overhead around the clock. This matters more than it might first seem. In a standoff like this, presence is not merely a formality. It is the entire strategy. Every gap in coverage is an opportunity for smugglers, attackers, or armed vessels to slip through unnoticed. The tanker bridge closes those gaps before they can even appear. Above the water, the aircraft work in layers, each with its own role. The first layer belongs to the F-35 Lightning II. Its radar and sensor systems give it a full 360-degree view of everything around it, turning the jet into something closer to a flying surveillance platform than a conventional fighter. It can spot a small boat leaving an Iranian port from a great distance and instantly share that information with every other aircraft and ship in the area. The second layer belongs to the F-16 Viper, which has become one of the most active aircraft supporting the blockade. These jets carry laser-guided rocket systems capable of tracking fast-moving drones. Once a pilot locks onto a target, onboard technology can keep tracking it automatically, allowing the pilot to stay focused on flying safely through contested airspace instead of manually guiding every shot. This capability matters because of how Iran typically operates in these waters rather than sending a single drone or boat. Iranian forces have often sent groups of them at once, hoping that sheer numbers will overwhelm any response. A fighter jet capable of engaging several targets in quick succession changes that equation completely and does so at a fraction of the cost of the drones it is shooting down. Behind these fighters, the tanker remains the quiet foundation making everything else possible. Every minute an F-16 or F-35 spends in the air depends on a KC-135 being nearby, ready to refuel it. This is not glamorous work. It rarely makes headlines, but without it, the entire structure of the blockade would collapse within hours. Looking ahead, another aircraft may soon join the system, though it has not yet been confirmed in combat. Shield AI's X-Pat is designed to take off and land vertically, meaning it does not need a traditional runway or a fixed base that could become a target. It operates using its own onboard mission software, allowing it to function with minimal outside guidance. According to the company's own estimates, between 10 and 20 of these aircraft could be built for roughly the cost of a single next-generation stealth bomber. If these autonomous aircraft are eventually deployed alongside existing fighter jets and the ongoing naval blockade, they could reshape how this kind of standoff is handled in the future. For now, the system already in place, built from a decades-old tanker and a rotation of advanced fighters, continues to be the primary reason American forces have maintained pressure over the Strait of Hormuz without a single aircraft coming under direct attack from Iranian forces. For months, Many analysts describe the Strait of Hormuz as a diplomatic problem, one that could eventually be resolved through talks, agreements, and careful negotiation. But the events of the past week point toward a different reality. The strait is not being controlled from the negotiating table. It is being controlled by the Revolutionary Guard on the water through force. This is no longer a matter of interpretation. The Revolutionary Guard itself said so directly. Even if a deal is signed with Oman, the Guard has made clear that it still considers itself the authority over the straits. It intends to keep enforcing its own conditions regardless of what Iran's diplomats agree to elsewhere. In effect, the group that physically controls the waterway has separated itself from the government meant to represent the country as a whole. This raises a difficult question for anyone hoping for a resolution. If the leadership in Thran does not fully control the forces operating in the strait, then any agreement reached in Oman may carry little weight where it matters most. Diplomatic language cannot stop a missile. Only the group firing it can do that. And right now, that group has said clearly that it is not bound by outside agreements. This divide does not exist alone. It fits into a broader pattern playing out across multiple regions at once, each testing how far military pressure can go before it forces a real response. In Ukraine, a similar strategy of steady targeted pressure has been unfolding, though aimed at a different kind of target. Early in the morning, 3 drones struck a large logistics warehouse more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest front line. Regional officials reported 8 drones downed in total, with 3 managing to hit the facility directly, forcing a nearby airport to shut down. This was not a random strike. Ukrainian forces have now hit around 20 facilities belonging to the same retail and logistics company since late July. Independent reporting suggests that at least 8 of the company's 15 largest logistics centers are now out of operation. The strategy is straightforward. Rather than targeting weapons directly, these strikes are aimed at the supply chains that make weapons production possible, including the everyday parts needed to build and repair drones. Military officials have reported that Russian units are now being forced to ration basic components like cameras, propellers, and batteries, items that are difficult to produce quickly under pressure. At the same time, thousands of kilometers away, Taiwan has been sending its own signal. Taiwan's newest battle tanks were moved onto the tarmac of a major international airport, positioned alongside armored vehicles taking up defensive positions near commercial aircraft. Engineers were seen assembling obstacles between the runways, a clear defensive measure. This marks the first time these particular tanks have been deployed to an airport setting. The reasoning behind this becomes clearer when placed beside events from a few years earlier, when a foreign power attempted to seize an airport outside a capital city early in a conflict, hoping to use it as a supply route. Taiwan's current preparations appear designed to prevent a similar scenario from playing out on its own soil, rehearsing the earliest and most critical hours of a potential crisis rather than a later stage of one. Taken together, these developments in the Persian Gulf, in Ukraine, and around Taiwan reflect a common theme. In each case, military pressure is being applied steadily and deliberately while political statements struggle to keep pace with what is actually happening on the ground. In the Strait of Hormuz specifically, the coming weeks are likely to reveal whether Iran's government can bring its own military under one unified position, or whether the divide between its diplomats and its Revolutionary Guard continues to widen. Until that question is answered, the ships, the tankers, and the aircraft maintaining pressure above the water will remain the clearest indicators of where this standoff truly stands, regardless of what is said in any future statement from Tehran.